Adanna sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the text message on her phone. Her best friend, David, had just confessed his love for her. But there was one problem: she was getting married to someone else in 2 weeks. Adanna and David had been best friends since secondary school. They did everything together, studied, laughed, and even cried. David was the guy who always had her back, the one who knew her better than anyone else. Adanna was engaged to John, a successful banker she had met at a friend's wedding. John was kind, handsome, and everything she thought she wanted in a man. But now, David's confession had turned her world upside down. It was a typical Lagos evening. The air was thick with humidity, and the sound of generators hummed in the background. Adanna had just finished work and was about to head home when her phone buzzed. It was a long message from David. At first, she thought it was one of his usual jokes, but as she read on, her heart began to race. "Adanna, I've been wanting to tell you this for years, but I was too scared. I love you. Not as a friend, but as someone who wants to spend the rest of their life with you. I know you're engaged to John, and I don't want to ruin what you have, but I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I just needed you to know." Adanna's hands trembled as she read the message again. She couldn't believe it. David, in love with her. How had she not seen it before? She thought back to all the times he had been there for her, where she was sick, where she failed her exams, when her dad passed away. He had always been her rock. But love, that was something she had never considered. Adanna sat there for what felt like hours, her mind racing. She thought about all the times David had been there for her, all the little things he did that showed he cared. Like the time he stayed up all night helping her study for her final exams, by the time he drove across town in the rain to bring her soup when she was sick. She had always thought of him as her best friend, but now she wondered if there had been something more all along. She thought about the time they had gone to the beach in Lekki. They had spent the whole day laughing and playing in the water. That evening, as the sun set, David had looked at her in a way that made her feel different. But she had brushed it off, thinking it was just the way friends looked at each other. Then there was the time she had introduced him to John. David had been unusually quiet that day. Adanna had thought he was just tired, but now she wondered if it was something more. Had he been hiding his feelings all this time? Adanna's phone buzzed again. It was John. "Hey babe, how was your day? Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Love you." Adanna stared at the message, her heart heavy. She loved John, but David's confession had stirred something inside her. Adanna's mind raced as she tried to process David's confession. She didn't know what to do. She thought about the time David had taken her to see her favorite band in concert. He had surprised her with tickets, even though he hated the band. He had spent the whole night standing next to her, smiling as she sang along to every song. She had always thought it was just a nice thing a friend would do, but now she wondered if it was more. Adanna's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She didn't know what to do. She loved John, but David's confession had opened up a floodgate of feelings she didn't even know she had. She needed to talk to someone, but who could she turn to? The next day, Adanna decided to meet David. She needed to see him face to face to understand what was going on. They met at their favorite spot, a small cafe in Ikeja where they used to hang out after school. David looked nervous as he sat across from her. Adanna could see the tension in his eyes. "David, what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I meant what I said, Adanna. I love you. I've loved you for years, but I was too scared to tell you. I didn't want to ruin our friendship. Adanna shook her head. But why now? Why tell me this when I'm about to get married? Because I couldn't stand the thought of losing you forever, David said, his voice breaking. I know it's selfish, but I had to tell you how I feel. Adanna felt tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't know what to say. She cared about David, but she was engaged to John. How could she choose between her best friend and the man she was supposed to spend the rest of her life with? They sat in silence for a while, the weight of David's confession hanging heavy in the air. Adanna didn't know what to do. She felt like her world was falling apart. She had always thought of David as her best friend, but now she was seeing him in a completely different light. Adanna spent the next few days in a daze. She couldn't stop thinking about David's confession. She tried to focus on her wedding preparations, but her heart wasn't in it. John noticed that something was wrong, but every time he asked, Adanna would brush it off. One evening, Adanna decided to talk to her older sister, Grace. Grace had always been her go-to person for advice. Grace, I don't know what to do, Adanna said, tears streaming down her face. David told me he loves me, and I don't know how I feel. I love John, but David has always been there for me. I'm so confused. Grace said, Adanna, this is a tough situation. But you need to ask yourself one question: who can't you live without? Who makes you feel like the best version of yourself? Adanna thought about it. John was kind and loving, but there was something about David that made her feel alive. He understood her in a way no one else did. But was that enough to risk everything she had with John? Adanna spent the next few days thinking about Grace's question. She thought about all the times John had made her laugh, all the little things he did that showed he cared. But she also thought about David and how he had always been there for her, no matter what. The wedding was just a week away, and Adanna knew she had to make a decision. She couldn't keep stringing both men along. She decided to meet David one last time. David, I care about you, but I'm engaged to John. I can't just throw that away, Adanna said, her voice shaking. I understand, David replied, his eyes filled with sadness. I just needed you to know how I feel. I don't want to stand in the way of your happiness. Adanna felt a lump in her throat. She didn't want to lose David, but she also didn't want to hurt John. It was an impossible choice. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Adanna didn't know what to do. She felt like she was being pulled in two different directions, and no matter what she chose, someone was going to get hurt. The day of the wedding arrived. Adanna stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. She looked beautiful in her white dress, but her heart was heavy. She thought about David and the years they had spent together. She thought about John and the life they had planned. As she walked down the aisle, Adanna's eyes scanned the crowd. She saw David sitting at the back, his face filled with pain. Her heart ached, but she knew what she had to do. She couldn't turn back now. When the priest asked if she would take John to be her husband, Adanna hesitated for a moment. Then she took a deep breath and said, I do. The wedding was beautiful, but Adanna couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She tried to focus on her new life with John, but thoughts of David kept peeping into her mind. A few months later, Adanna ran into David at a mutual friend's wedding. They hadn't spoken since her wedding day. How have you been? Adanna asked, her voice trembling. I've been okay, David replied, forcing a smile. I just want you to be happy, Adanna. That's all I've ever wanted. Adanna felt tears welling up in her eyes. I'm sorry, David. I didn't mean to hurt you. "It's okay," David said, his voice soft. "I just needed you to know how I felt. That's all that matters." As Adanna watched David walk away, she realized that she had made the right choice. She loved John, and she was committed to making their marriage work. But a part of her would always wonder what could have been. Adanna and Joel's marriage was not without its challenges, but they walked through them together. Adanna never told John about David's confession, but she often thought about it. She knew that life was full of difficult choices, and sometimes you had to follow your heart, even if it meant letting go of someone you cared about. Years later, Adanna and David reconnected as friends. They both had moved on with their lives, but the bond they shared remained. Adanna realized that some relationships were meant to be, even if they didn't turn out the way you expected. This story is a realistic portrayal of love, friendship, and the difficult choices we sometimes have to make. It's a reminder that life is full of surprises, and sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most growth. What would you do if you were in Adanna's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.